In today's world, it definitely feels like uncertainty is more pervasive than ever before. Whether you're talking about economical instability, locally, globally, or the geopolitical tensions, and even some of the more exciting topics like the technological disruptions that we see. But this all adds to this whole pot of uncertainty.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head just in the intro there, I think, to be so. For me, there's maybe three things I'd like to highlight, which I believe make the past and the present very different from an uncertainty perspective. The first being, the pace at which things are changing for, whether that be events, catastrophic events, or new innovations, as you mentioned, or the access to information that we have. The pace and access of what we're experiencing means that markets are moving much faster than they once did. Secondly, to your point, risks are no longer just economic. We are facing a multitude of risks at any point in time, or considerations around geopolitics, around climate, around inequality, and many more, linked to the technological advancements you mentioned. That is factor number two. What both of these do is they really influence the way investors behave. I think that is perhaps what makes the impact of uncertainty the biggest differential between the way things once were and how they are today.
So, just in your point on the level of information that we do have, when you talk about uncertainty, some of the thoughts that come to mind is concepts around market volatility and speculation, because understanding how those fit in will help determine the type of portfolio that you built for resilience.
Yeah, I mean, I'd maybe start with the fundamental, which is why are we investing in the first place? I think the ultimate goal of an investment is to get the best optimized equation when it comes to risk and return. So can we take, the least amount of risk to get the most amount of return linked to what our goals and desires are for that investment and why we're investing in the first place? If we think about market volatility, it's really just the normal fluctuation in an asset price. It's often driven by external factors, and it's just about how are investors processing information and how is that leading to a change in an asset price. This then comes with a much more long term nature because we know this is something that is going to happen consistently over time. Whilst the information might be different and may change, we know that volatility, in effect, the way that information is processed and priced, will always exist. So the need to stay invested over the long term with market volatility is incredibly important. Speculation, on the other hand, is a lot more short term in nature. It often triggers our biases, overconfidence to mention one, a recency bias, which is our tendency to favor or highlight information we've recently heard over something that we potentially know to be true for a longer period over each other, as well as herding. So how are we fitting in with the crowd? And all these factors often can contribute to more internal investor driven behavior, which leads to speculation. So it's not based on fundamentals. Market volatility is effectively an assessment of fundamentals. How do we internalize that information and then price things? And how does the market react to that? Whereas speculation, as I've said, is a lot more just based on headlines or information that is just short, punchy, or narratives that we tell ourselves or that are told to us, which can potentially lead us in hot water if we're not careful in terms of the short term and short termism versus how do we manage volatility over the long term.
Maxine, you touched on a very important point that I want to emphasize. You spoke about investing through market volatility and speculation. How does that shape your portfolio or make your decision making process?
So perhaps, they say the first rule of investing is diversification. The second is probably don't make any investment decisions based on speculation alone. And what I mean by that is what we know is the way in which investors will achieve the most consistent return is by staying in the market. It's not about investing at a particular time of the market, but staying invested over the long term. If we tend to let information that is speculative uh, cause us to divest perhaps when things are going bad and then want to invest when performance is up or when there's a run in the market, it is through that chopping and changing that we potentially compromise our returns the most. So taking on speculative risk, if you want to call it, is not real risk. You're just mispricing an asset based on short-term information. Much rather would say is get comfortable with volatility and know that volatility will exist, but that your investment will endure through cycles of volatility because of the way in which that investment is managed and the way in which you are able to navigate through the noise to make sure that you're sticking to what those fundamentals are telling you.
So obviously talking about uncertainty in terms of building portfolios, but the other side of it is from a life insurance, you can't talk uncertainties without how can life insurance actually help you with that?
Yeah, and two, I think the thread of a lot of our conversation today has been around how have things changed, and how have industries adapted to that change. And on the insurance side, it's perhaps one of the most notable evolutions in terms of meeting new needs in a changing world. And what I mean by that is, for eons, I think life insurance was seen as just a post-death event. Benefit, where it was really about, when I pass away, are the people that are left behind going to be catered for financially in some shape or form? I think what we're dealing with now is, it's not just about that eventuality of death. It's about how do we potentially have things in place that can safeguard us against unexpected illness or unexpected events that could lead to, disease, dreaded disease or disability, etc., which would, we're still very much living, but being able to be financially secure in that environment is a lot more complex and difficult. So it's become more, I suppose, more tailored, more bespoke, more flexible, to help people navigate life's uncertainties with a sense of safety. That should one of these unexpected events happen, and they are, prematurely unable to have the same amount of financial stability that they once had, that those things can be catered for. And that can include, some of what I've mentioned, but it could also include something like an education policy, for your children's education over time, or something that is about extended care if you need extended care, over the long term. So it really is encouraging to see that we have these mechanisms in place, which it's almost like an enhanced financial planning system, and not necessarily just a post-death eventuality.
So, Maxine, this has been a great conversation. We'll have to bring you back and discuss maybe some of these topics in more detail. As parting words, what are some of the key principles you'd like somebody listening to this to take out of the dealing with a world of uncertainty and responding and going ahead?
I think you're right. We might need part two to fully cover that question, but maybe a couple of things I'll touch on which have really stood out to me. The one is just, we don't actually know that much about a lot. And I think understanding that our ability to predict what is going to happen in the future is probably very limited. So we should invest more time in our preparedness than we do in trying to predict what is going to happen. So that's perhaps number one. So the other thing is that, wounds heal, but scars last. And what I mean by that is that whether you are navigating uncertainty financially or otherwise, you're bound to encounter some tough times. And you'll make it through those times, and your wounds will heal. But the way in which those experiences shape you and your mindset will forever remain. And I think it's important to understand what has shaped your money story until now, and be aware of how that might be influencing your perception of risk and of reward looking into the future. The third thing is that, stories are the most powerful tool. And so when we think about valuation, what is valuation? It's effectively a number of today multiplied by the story of tomorrow. And however compelling the story of tomorrow is, irrespective of how potentially true that story is going to become as a reality, is ultimately going to influence valuation. And so we must just be mindful. What stories are we listening to? What are we believing? And how is that potentially influencing our ability to make the right financial decisions? And perhaps lastly, it's just to bear in mind that, you know, behavioral finance tells us that we feel a loss or pain twice as much than we do the benefit of a gain. And so, thinking about how do we protect ourselves from the downside, not only how much of the upside are we trying to get, and working with a professional that can bring in the tools that we have that are, fundamental research, diversification, seeing through the noise, being your mirror and your trusted partner. These are ways in which we can, not necessarily perfectly, but we can certainly be more equipped to navigate uncertainty in a fairly meaningful way.